In the hidden vaults of the Wisconsin diocese lies a collection of papers that the Catholic Church has tried to erase from memory for more than 160 years. These records describe the unexplained vanishing of 23 nuns from St. Mary's Convent, a remote religious institution near Lake Michigan, between the years 1854 and 1862. Officially, church leaders dismissed these accounts as clerical mistakes or simple misunderstandings. Yet, testimony from 3 separate diocesan investigators, combined with a bundle of private letters discovered during a recent renovation, concealed within the convent's very walls, tells a story so dreadful that even veteran historians have questioned if such darkness could truly take root within sacred ground. What follows is the first complete retelling of what many believe to be the most chilling scandal in American religious history, an episode the Church has spent enormous sums to keep buried. Before we continue with the tale of St. Mary's Convent, a quick request. If you find this unsettling story worth hearing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We bring forward the forgotten shadows of America's past, stories long hidden in dusty archives. And let us know where in the country are you listening from tonight. Leave your answer in the comments below. Now, let us step back into the Wisconsin countryside of 1854, where this grim story begins. The morning mist rolled heavy off Lake Michigan as Bishop William Quarter's carriage creaked through the gates of a vast estate that would soon become St. Mary's Convent. The Catholic Church had purchased the former mansion of a wealthy lumber baron, a limestone structure rising from 30 acres of thick woodland. It was to be the first major Catholic institution in Wisconsin, then a largely Protestant territory. The goal was clear: to establish a Catholic stronghold in America's rapidly expanding frontier, where Lutheran and Methodist communities already held firm ground. The mansion itself, built in 1842, bore Gothic arches and long, narrow windows that seemed to glare outward like watchful eyes. Its 3 wings stretched in solemn symmetry, the eastern halls designated for the nuns' living quarters, the western for an orphanage and infirmary, while behind the main house stood a chapel, its spire piercing above the forest and visible from miles across the flat countryside. Locals eyed the newcomers with suspicion. The black habits and Irish accents of the arriving sisters marked them as strangers among the German and Scandinavian settlers. Many Protestant families were unsettled by the rigid hierarchy of Catholicism, which contrasted sharply with their own simpler, community-led worship. On the day of the convent's consecration, a small crowd gathered outside the gates. "Papists," muttered Elijah Hoffman, a respected elder of the local Lutheran congregation, as he watched the procession of robed women enter the chapel. "They'll poison our children with their idols." Beside him, Wilhelm Schmidt scowled. "My grandfather fled Germany to escape their persecution, and now they follow us even here." Though not every settler shared such open hostility, these deep-rooted tensions would form the ominous backdrop for the horrors that unfolded at St. Mary's. Inside the chapel, Bishop Quarter's voice rang against the stone walls. St. Mary's will shine as a light of mercy in this wilderness, he proclaimed before clergy and community leaders. Colored beams from the stained glass lit his words in flickering hues across the pews. Under the guidance of Mother Superior Catherine Murphy, this convent will house orphans, care for the sick, and bring comfort to the widow. He then introduced the 3 women who would lead the convent. Mother Superior Catherine, 42, cut a commanding figure, sharp feet, with piercing pale blue eyes that seemed to strip away all pretense. A veteran of St. Augustine's in Boston, she carried herself with an authority that brooked no challenge. Sister Elizabeth Foster, 38, warm and plump with a gentle smile, would run the orphanage. She spoke slowly, as though weighing each word. Trait many mistook for thoughtfulness. Sister Margaret Clark, 35, stern and meticulous, would oversee the infirmary. With her tall frame, dark eyes, and expertise in herbal medicine, she had impressed physicians in Boston and New York alike. Behind them stood 20 young nuns, most barely in their 20s and freshly arrived from Ireland. Their faces were solemn as the bishop blessed them one by one, though some betrayed a flicker of nervousness when they thought no one was watching. That first night, candlelight threw restless shadows across the convent's refectory. The air carried the scent of fresh bread and weak tea, while the Wisconsin chill seeped through the thick stone walls. Mother Catherine rose before the assembled sisters. "The Lord has called us to this wilderness," she declared, her voice firm against the crackle of the hearth. "We will face hardships unknown to our Eastern sisters, but our faith will sustain us." The women bowed their heads in silence, unaware of the darkness waiting in the years ahead. Suspicion lingered in the eyes of those who did not understand their faith. Yet the sisters were taught that perseverance, prayer, and sacrifice would overcome hostility. For the youngest among them, far from home and family, such words became an anchor in a strange and uncertain land. That first evening, as the sisters prepared for rest, Sister Agnes leaned close to whisper across the narrow gap between the simple cots in the dormitory hall. "Do you think the townsfolk will ever welcome us?" Her voice wavered, despite the brave face she had worn all day. Sister Bernadette reached through the dark and squeezed her hand. "They feared our Lord once, too. If we prove ourselves by good works, their hearts will soften." The hushed exchange ended at once as footsteps echoed in the corridor, Mother Catherine moving silently on her nightly inspection. Her stern presence ensured everything remained in order on this first night. Within weeks, the convent found its rhythm. The bells tolled at 3 a.m., dragging weary women from their beds onto the cold chapel floor for matins. Day after day, the ancient drone of Latin chants drifted from the stone walls 7 times daily. From the darkness of early morning until Compline closed the night at 9. In time, their prayers became part of the landscape, as familiar as wind through pine boughs, or the distant lowing of cattle between devotions. The sisters cared for orphans, tended the sick, and cultivated wide gardens to sustain their community. Their schedule was unrelenting: prayer, labor, humble meals, brief rest, and more. Prayer cycle, meant to turn minds from worldly comfort toward divine purpose. By the winter of 1854, 12 children lived under their roof, mostly the sons and daughters of Irish immigrants lost to accidents in lumber camps and on the rails. Sister Elizabeth guided them with patience, teaching letters and numbers alongside catechism. On Sundays, townsfolk occasionally visited after Mass, bearing sweets for the children and sometimes asking about adoption. The infirmary, led by Sister Margaret, soon earned respect beyond the convent walls. With knowledge of simple remedies, poultices for swelling, teas for fever, compresses for the lungs, she treated neighbors when snow and ice made doctors unreachable. Her skill saved lives during the brutal Wisconsin winter, softening the distrust of locals who had once eyed the convent warily. They keep to themselves, but they do good work. Farmer Elijah Hoffman admitted to his congregation after his grandson's cough yielded to Sister Margaret's care. Their ways are strange, but perhaps there is room for more than one road to heaven in this country. Among the youngest was Sister Agnes O'Connor, only 23. Her letters back to Ireland, still preserved in the Dublin Diocesan archives, reveal the convent's early years through her eyes, written in neat, careful hand. They begin with hope, but slowly darken as months pass. The labor is heavier than I ever dreamed, she confessed in December 1854. The ink is blurred in places, as though tears fell upon the page. My hands bleed from scrubbing linens in frozen water. The chapel stones cut into our knees during prayer. Yet Mother Catherine assures us this pleases God. She wrote tenderly of her sisters, of Elizabeth, who slipped her spare blankets on bitter nights, of Margaret, whose remedies saved the orphans during a fever that swept through the dormitories. The children burned as though with fire, and we thought they would all be taken. But her willow bark syrup brought relief. I believe our work is holy, though I still weep for the green hills of home. But what Annis's words never fully conveyed, perhaps, what she herself had not grasped, were the darker shifts already creeping into life at St. Mary's. Mother Catherine's discipline, once merely firm, hardened into something far more severe. Mistakes, once corrected with patience, were now punished harshly. One evening in January 1855, Sister Josephine coughed during silent prayer. For this, she was sentenced to kneel on dried peas while reciting the entire rosary. When she returned, her knees were raw and bleeding. As Sister Mary Collins quietly helped her mend her habit, Mother Catherine's sudden voice pierced the room. Do not coddle her weakness. Discipline is the root of devotion. Let all of you remember this. By spring, the convent's reputation outside was glowing. Their charity during a measles outbreak in the lumber camps brought them praise and donations even from Protestant ministers. But behind the convent walls, life had grown colder. Silence now ruled the refectory. Recreation hours passed with tense stillness where laughter once lingered. The young women who had crossed the sea together now moved like shadows, careful, watchful, afraid. The first true disturbance came in April 1855. That morning, one place in the chapel stood empty. Sister Agnes had not come to prayers. The gap in the perfect line of sisters was impossible to miss. Whispers flickered through the candlelit hall until Mother Catherine entered, her face unreadable. "Sister Agnes has been called to our mission in Minnesota," she announced, and with that the silence deepened. At breakfast, Mother Catherine made her announcement in a voice that brooked no reply. Her words fell like iron on the quiet gathering. "The sudden departure of Sister Agnes. Her calling has come swiftly, as such things often do. We shall pray for her success in her new undertaking." The community sat in stunned silence until Sister Bernadette's spoon slipped and clattered against her bowl. "But, Mother," she said nothing to me. "And we," she faltered, for Mother Catherine's pale, unblinking eyes were upon her. "Do you suggest, Sister Bernadette, that a bride of Christ must seek permission from her companions before answering his summons?" The question hung in the air like frost. "No, Mother." "Forgive me," Bernadette murmured, lowering her gaze to her untouched porridge. No one had witnessed Agnes pack. No one had heard her speak of any transfer in her letters. Yet when evening came, her small cell was bare. The prayer book, the rosary, carved from wood by her mother's hands, the thick woolen stockings for the bitter winters gone, as though she had truly departed. But Sister Mary Collins, whose cat stood beside Agnes's, whispered to Sister Teresa Donovan in the convent garden, "Her cloak is still on its peg." Would she have left without it? In April, in Minnesota. Teresa glanced at the windows nervously. Perhaps she was given another for the journey. "We should not question aloud, Sister." 3 months later, Bernadette herself vanished. Again, Mother Catherine explained, "The bishop has requested her presence in Chicago." She departed before dawn. No farewell, no word. Just another empty cot. This time, Sister Elizabeth repeated the tale during work hours, praising Bernadette's skill with orphans and insisting she was chosen to help establish a new foundling home. But her eyes, usually warm, remained cold as she spoke. By the winter of 1855. 3 more had transferred in the same fashion. Always the gentle ones, the ones whose beauty or sweetness made them beloved. Families who wrote letters received strange, stilted replies, months later formal notes, all in the same hand. None belonged to the women themselves. Sister Teresa Donovan, tall and broad-shouldered from years of farm work, was among the few bold enough to voice her doubts. She had already drawn Mother Catherine's displeasure for questioning harsh penances imposed on the younger sisters. "It's strange, is it not?" she whispered to Sister Mary as they pulled early carrots in the summer of 1856. "So many transfers, yet no proper papers. And always the youngest, the prettiest, first Agnes with her golden hair, then Bernadette with her voice, then Catherine, Josephine." She trailed off. A shadow crossed the garden. Sister Margaret stood watching from the convent windows, her thin face unreadable. "Mother Catherine has her reasons," Mary whispered quickly. We must trust. The next week, Teresa was gone. A contemplative retreat in Montreal came the official word. That evening, Mary discovered a page from Teresa's prayer book tucked beneath her pillow, scrawled in the margin. Something is wrong. If I vanish, tell Father Ryan. By 1857, the pattern was undeniable. Of the 20 young nuns who had entered, only 12 remained. Outwardly, St. Mary's thrived. The infirmary treated the sick. The orphanage bustled with children, and Sunday visitors saw nothing but devotion. But within its stone walls, dread coiled tighter with each season. Punishments grew harsher. A misstep meant days of fasting or nights kneeling on bare stone floors. When Sister Claire O'Donnell was caught with a piece of chocolate from home, she was forced to confess gluttony before the entire community and sentenced to 3 days fast. On the second day, she fainted in chapel. Sister Margaret revived her with smelling salts. Lips curved faintly in what some later swore was a smile. One frigid night in January of 1858, Sister Mary Collins woke to muffled sobs from the adjoining cell. She recognized the voice of Rebecca Murphy, then Mother Catherine's sharp whisper, "You will come with us now. Make a sound, and you will regret it." There was the scrape of feet, a brief shuffle and silence. Sister Mary lay rigid in her narrow cot, pulse hammering so violently she feared it would betray her. From the hall outside came the groan of old boards 1, 2, 3 sets of feet retreating from Sister Rebecca's quarters. Then it came, a sound that would haunt her forever, a stifled cry, abruptly smothered. Then the unmistakable scrape of weight dragged across the floor by morning. Mother Catherine addressed the community with serene authority. "Sister Rebecca has been called to the Dakota Territory," she announced at breakfast. "The native children there require a gentle hand, and her patience with orphans has prepared her for this sacred duty." Her pale gaze swept the refectory, pausing ever so slightly upon Sister Mary. "We shall mourn her absence, yet rejoice in God's design." Though trembling with dread, Sister Mary forced herself through prayers. Her rosary slipped between shaking fingers, the words of the creed forming on her lips, even as her thoughts swirled with dreadful possibilities. What had become of Rebecca, of the others who had gone before her? That afternoon, broom in hand, Mary lingered outside Mother Catherine's office. The heavy oak door stood slightly ajar, allowing voices to spill out. "This one will fetch a finer price," murmured a man, surely the doctor. Then Sister Elizabeth spoke, her tone icy and unrecognizable. "Men pay more for the untouched ones." Glass clinked as Sister Margaret replied, "We must pace ourselves. 3 gone in 1 month has already drawn comment." The bishop's secretary noticed. Mother Catherine's dismissive laugh chilled Mary's blood. "A generous gift toward his cathedral fund will silence him. Our cover remains perfect nuns assigned to frontier work or succumbing to illness during their labors. No one doubts. Such accounts. What of the Collins girl?" Sister Margaret's voice dropped lower. "She watches, listens, silence." Then Catherine answered, calm and measured, "Not yet. She's too plain to bring much. and her brother in the seminary. Writes often. If she vanishes now, questions will rise. Rebecca will satisfy the doctor's clients for the time being. Mary fled, heart pounding, the truth arranging itself in horrific order. The vanished sisters, always the youngest and fairest, the wealthy. Visitors, the locked north wings. The sudden prosperity of a convent that claimed poverty. That night, after restless prayer, she resolved upon desperate action. During her weekly errand to gather eggs, her one unsupervised moment beyond the walls, she slipped a folded note into the pocket of Jimmy Fletcher, the farmer's boy who brought milk each morning. His eyes widened as her fingers brushed his coat. "Take this to Father Thomas at St. Joseph's," she whispered, pressing her silver confirmation cross into his hand. "Tell no one. Souls depend on it." The boy's freckles tightened in solemn determination. "I promise, sister." The note, later preserved in diocesan archives, was stark. "Evil dwells at St. Mary's. The sisters do not depart as claimed. By fear for my life. Send help. Sister Mary Collins." Father Thomas Ryan, the young Irish priest who received the message, had long harbored doubts about Mother Catherine. He had seen the convent's numbers thin, heard her evasive explanations. The cross in his hand weighed heavy. No nun would part with such a gift lightly. He paced his cramped study, the floorboards groaning beneath each turn. To challenge a Mother Superior was dangerous. Catherine Murphy was powerful, well-connected, but he could not remain silent. Rather than confront her, Father Ryan rode to Milwaukee, enduring frozen ruts and muddy stretches, until at last he reached Bishop John Henney's residence. The bishop welcomed him into a richly appointed study, warm and perfumed with comfort, far removed from Ryan's bare parish house. At first the bishop spoke eagerly of the new cathedral rising in Milwaukee, a monument he declared would outshine any west of New York. Father Ryan nodded, waiting, until at last the bishop inquired after his parish. Carefully, Ryan laid out his fears, the missing sisters, the hollow explanations, the letter from Mary Collins. As he spoke, Bishop Henney's genial warmth faded into guarded neutrality. "These are grave charges, Father," he said at length, setting aside the silver cross without so much as a glance. "Mother Catherine has provided me with satisfactory explanations for each transfer." Father Ryan had accepted the bishop's explanations for the first few transfers. But now, with 8 nuns vanished in less than 3 years, his patience was at an end. "Your Excellency," he pressed, "there are no records of these women after they supposedly left. No letters, no proof they are serving elsewhere." The bishop's expression hardened. "The frontier missions demand capable sisters," he replied, standing to close the matter. "I will not have idle speculation staining the Church's good name in this Protestant country. Mother Catherine has been most generous toward our cathedral's construction, and her holiness is unquestionable. Do not allow suspicion to blind your loyalty." As he ushered the young priest out, his tone sharpened. "See to your parish, Father Ryan. Convents are the concern of those appointed by God." Disheartened but resolute, Father Ryan left with a new resolve. If his superiors would not confront the mystery, he would pursue it himself. That chance came in March of 1858, when Bishop Henny directed him to collect annual financial accounts from every parish and religious house. At last, he had an official reason to inspect St. Mary's records. The spring wind cut through his heavy coat as his horse-drawn buggy rattled toward the convent. The building struck him immediately more forlorn than he remembered. The gardens were untended, the windows dim. Even the bell tower rang less often, its voice muffled as if something weighed upon it. Sister Elizabeth greeted him at the door. Her customary warmth was gone. Dark shadows bruised her eyes, and her habit bore small stains. An undone pin. "Father Ryan, we did not expect you," she said quickly. "Mother Catherine is unwell today. If you leave the diocesan forms, she will complete them by week's end." The bishop's instructions were clear. Ryan answered firmly, though inside he felt his lack of seniority keenly. Setting his briefcase on the table, he added, "This year the reports must be reviewed personally. Too many irregularities have been found elsewhere." Her smile slipped. "That is impossible. Sister Margaret, our bookkeeper, is occupied in the infirmary with a dying child." "Then I will wait," he said, seating himself with determination. "Perhaps I might tour the convent while I do so. It has been years since I have seen the orphanage." Something flickered in her eye-sphere, perhaps anger, but it vanished as swiftly as it came. "As you wish, Father. Only avoid the north wing. Influenza is spreading there." The north wing, always barred to him, always with excuses. His suspicion grew sharper. The tour unsettled him. The convent appeared half empty, nothing like the glowing reports sent to the diocese. Only 7 orphans, not 20. Only 3 patients in the infirmary, none gravely ill. Sister Margaret was nowhere to be found, and fewer nuns, far fewer. He had counted 15 the last time he said Mass there. Now only 8 remained. Whenever he named a missing Sister Rebecca, Josephine, Claire, the same vague answers came. Transfers, missions, special assignments. At the laundry he asked casually, "And Sister Mary Collins?" Sister Elizabeth faltered. "She departed just last week for St. Louis. The orphans there needed her." Father Ryan nodded, hiding his alarm. The writer of the desperate note was gone. Before leaving, he asked to see the chapel. Once immaculate, it now showed neglect. Dust on rails, tarnished candlesticks, wilted flowers. A hollow stillness hung over the place where 24 voices once rose in prayer. When Sister Elizabeth turned aside to speak with a novice, Father Ryan slipped into a side corridor leading to the residential wing. Silence pressed in on him. Cells stood empty, possessions gone. Then a faint sound, a moan or a stifled sob, from behind a door reinforced with iron. He bent to the keyhole. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" A pause. Then a rasping female whisper, "Father, please, help us." Before he could answer, another voice rang sharply behind him, Mother Catherine's. "This wing is cloistered. Father Ryan, you trespass where you do not belong." He turned. The Mother Superior stood flanked by Sister Margaret and a hulking man in laborer's clothes, his arms thick as tree limbs, his stare full of menace. Ryan forced a bow. "Forgive me, Mother," he said, fighting to steady his voice. Father Ryan found himself disoriented after leaving the chapel. Mother Catherine's pale, calculating eyes studied him with an intensity that seemed sharper than ever. Though her frame had grown thinner since his last visit, her command over the place appeared only to have deepened. "This section of the convent," she explained coolly, "is reserved for sisters undergoing particular spiritual guidance. Their isolation is vital to their progress." "I distinctly heard someone calling for help," Father Ryan replied, summoning his courage. "That was Sister Anne engaged in her devotions." Sister Margaret interjected smoothly. "Some of our most fervent sisters practice penances of the body. Their cries can sound troubling to those unfamiliar with advanced disciplines." Mother Catherine inclined her head toward a large, broad-shouldered man waiting nearby. "Mr. Callahan will escort you out. The financial records will reach Milwaukee by the week's end." The man stepped forward, his grip on Father Ryan's arm far firmer than necessary, his false courtesy undercut by a quiet menace. "This way, Father." As he was led away, Ryan cast one final glance toward the locked door. Who had spoken to him? What did she mean by us? How many women were hidden beyond that barrier? The instant his buggy passed the convent gates, Ryan lashed the reins, his horse bolting into a desperate gallop. His mind raced as fast as its pounding hooves. The voice, the sealed door, the vanished nuns, the fearful children, and the looming presence of Callahan, unmistakable signs of something dark festering within St. Mary's. This was beyond his capacity as a simple parish priest. He needed higher intervention. Distrusting Bishop Hennehum, he now suspected of either corruption or deliberate blindness. Ryan telegraphed Archbishop John Hughes in New York. Grave concerns at St. Mary's Convent, Wisconsin. Multiple sisters missing. Evidence of confinement. Potential danger to remaining residents. Local bishop unresponsive. Request immediate investigation. If you feel a chill creeping up your spine as this tale unfolds, you're not alone. Many of our community members report the same when encountering suppressed histories. Take a moment to like this video and share it with others who appreciate forgotten mysteries. It helps us continue revealing America's hidden past. Now, let us return to 1858, where a storm was gathering over St. Mary's, one that would bring Horus into the light. Archbishop Hughes, renowned for his firm governance, reacted without delay. Instead of alerting Bishop Henney, he sent his trusted secretary, Monsignor Patrick Kelly, to conduct a sudden inspection. On April 17, 1858, Monsignor Kelly arrived unannounced at the convent gates, accompanied by Father Ryan and 2 senior priests from neighboring parishes. It was a bright spring morning, the kind that usually stirred hope in Wisconsin's farmers. Yet an unsettling weight seemed to hang over St. Mary's stone walls. Ravens wheeled above the bell tower, their harsh calls breaking the uneasy silence. Their reception confirmed the unease. Mother Catherine, usually composed, looked startled and pale at the sight of Kelly's robes and the sealed papers he bore. The convent itself seemed thrown into disorder. Nuns rushed through corridors, and from an open window Ryan glimpsed two young sisters hurrying papers to the kitchen, where flames already roared in the iron stove. The smell of burning documents drifted through the courtyard. This procedure is highly irregular. Monsignor, Mother Catherine protested in a strained voice. We have established protocols. Bishop Henny always sends warning weeks ahead, which is precisely why the Archbishop instructed me otherwise, Kelly replied evenly. In his 50s, with silver hair and a soldier's weathered face, he radiated an authority even Catherine struggled to confront. He held up the Archbishop's sealed letter. I am empowered to inspect every aspect of this institution, records, finances, and residents alike. There will be no exceptions. Catherine's eyes flicked toward Sister Margaret, who lingered in a doorway, her expression unreadable. Some unspoken message passed between them before Catherine forced a smile. Of course, Monsignor St. Mary's has nothing to conceal, but I must ask that you honor the enclosure of our cloistered sisters. Their solitude must not be disturbed. My mandate covers all areas, Kelly replied coldly. Every door will be opened. What followed stretched into a long day, later preserved in Kelly's 40-page report as a discovery of horrors unlike anything the Church had faced in modern times. The investigators divided their duties. Ryan, lead Kelly to the locked northern wing, while the other priests began questioning the visible nuns and combing through the convent's accounts. At the entrance to the wing, Sister Elizabeth barred their way. Her normally gentle face was hard with resolve. Mother Catherine has forbidden entry here, she insisted. The sisters inside are in retreat. Kelly's tone was calm but firm. Sister, I carry the authority of Archbishop Hughes. Open this door, or you risk breaking your vow of obedience. Elizabeth's composure cracked. Her voice dropped to a fearful whisper. You don't understand what you're about to do. He will be very displeased. He, do you mean Bishop Henny? Father Ryan pressed. Elizabeth only shook her head, her eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting some unseen presence. After a moment of trembling hesitation, she stepped aside. The door was opened at last. Then what lay beyond would shock the Church to its core. 5 nuns, among them the missing sister Rebecca, were discovered locked away in what had once been a storage chamber. The room, barely 15 feet square, contained nothing more than a foul chamber pot and thin pallets scattered on the floor. The only window had been boarded up long ago, leaving the women in nearly complete darkness, broken only by the light from the door now standing open. The captives were pale, half-starved, their habits ragged and stained. Their faces bore the hollow look of prolonged fear and neglect. One, later identified as Sister Josephine Brady, was heavily with child, her distended belly an eerie contrast against her wasted frame. The stench of filth and unwashed flesh was overwhelming. Father Ryan turned his face aside, fighting his stomach. while Monsignor Kelly crossed himself in horrified disbelief. "In God's name," the old cleric murmured, "what has been done here?" Rebecca, once lively and strong, rose unsteadily, her eyes sunken, her body skeletal. Her voice was broken from either screaming or long disuse. "Father Ryan," she whispered hoarsely, clutching at his sleeve, "you came back. They're preparing us," she continued as he eased her, "Pee into a chair, for the doctor, for the house in Chicago." "What doctor?" Kelly asked, lowering himself to one knee despite his age. "What house, Dr. Matthews?" Rebecca breathed. "He comes to examine us, to choose who is fit. They say men will pay more for nuns for brides of Christ." While Father Ryan and Kelly tended to the victims, other priests searched the convent and made equally grim discoveries. In Sister Margaret's private rooms, reached only through a concealed doorway from the infirmary, they uncovered shelves filled with narcotics, laudanum, chloroform, and other agents used to render victims helpless. A bound ledger contained clinical notes on the sisters, cataloguing their treatments and recording which was suitable for transport. In the financial records, worse revelations emerged. Though the convent's official income appeared meager, the books showed large and regular deposits, far beyond what a frontier convent could earn. Certain entries were written in code. Transferred Sister Agnes O'Connor, May 1855. Commission $400. Condition excellent. Another read. Sister Teresa Donovan, unsuitable. Terminated November 1856. No commission. Piece by piece, the appalling truth came into focus. Through questioning the survivors, Monsignor Kelly learned that Mother Catherine, Sister Elizabeth, and Sister Margaret were impostors who had assumed false identities years earlier. Sister Claire O'Donnell, trembling beneath a blanket, gave crucial testimony. "I heard them one night." Mother Catherine argued with Sister Margaret. She called her by her real name, Catherine. She said they'd changed identities before, and they could again if discovered. The original abbess, Catherine Murphy, had in fact died shortly after arriving in Wisconsin, poisoned. A former assistant in the infirmary later revealed that something had been slipped into her nightly tea. She vomited blood until her death, officially declared consumption, and was denied visits from the other sisters. Once in control, the three impostors established ties with a chain of charitable houses. Across the Midwest, brothels for wealthy patrons with twisted appetites, nuns chosen for their youth, beauty, or innocence were first isolated under false charges of disobedience, then drugged, and finally delivered to paying benefactors. "They came after Compline," Rebecca confessed flatly, her voice empty of emotion. "Men in fine suits, smelling of whiskey and perfume. Mother Catherine brought them to the north wing. They paid extra if we wore our habits. Those who conceived, like Sister Josephine, were kept until childbirth, then sold into brothels in Chicago or St. Louis, their pregnancies advertised as rare attractions. Many perished within a few years from disease or abuse. Sister Margaret oversaw it all, recording menstrual cycles, laughing when one of them missed her bleeding. She'd say, 'We were worth more now,' Rebecca said. The orphanage, too, was a mask. Girls approaching puberty were adopted by generous strangers sold into the same network. Boys, meanwhile, were shipped out as unpaid farmhands, with the convent pocketing placement fees. As for those who resisted, their fate was grim. Sister Teresa Donovan, who had dared to question the Vanishings, had never been sent to Montreal, as claimed. Rebecca revealed the truth. Teresa had been kept prisoner for weeks, repeatedly abused. When she still refused to break, she was strangled by the man they called Callahan. The bodies of Sister Teresa and at least 3 other women who had resisted were discovered in shallow, unmarked graves beneath the convent's vegetable plots. Mother Catherine forced us to watch. Sister Claire sobbed, her face streaked with tears. She said it was a lesson in obedience. Teresa had prayed her rosary until her final breath. Even as Callahan's hands drew the rope tight around her throat. That April evening, Monsignor Kelly decreed that St. Mary's Convent be sealed without delay. The surviving sisters were escorted away under protection, and armed men were stationed at the gates to preserve evidence and prevent any escape. Mother Catherine, Sister Margaret, and Sister Elizabeth were placed under ecclesiastical arrest, confined to their cells until the sheriffs could take custody. I only did as I was told. Sister Elizabeth whimpered as she was locked away. Catherine, cold and expressionless, claimed it was all God's will, insisting that the money served the greater glory of the Church. She offered no defense, only silence, while Margaret's strangely detached wore the faint trace of a smile. "You have no idea what you've uncovered," she whispered to Kelly. "We serve a higher cause than you can grasp." But secrecy was short-lived. Callahan, the brute who had carried out many of the killings, returned after nightfall to find the convent swarming with guards. He fled immediately toward Chicago, likely warning their associates along the way. When county lawmen arrived the next morning with warrants, Catherine and Margaret had somehow vanished from their locked chambers. Only Elizabeth remained, discovered in the chapel, unresponsive, staring blankly at the altar. The windows were barred, the doors intact. It was as though the women had slipped into air itself. Investigators concluded that the building's origins as a frontier magnate's mansion likely concealed hidden tunnels, escape routes designed for secret meetings and hasty departures. The inquiry that followed exposed the entire network. From a safe hidden in Catherine's quarters, authorities seized ledgers documenting transactions of over $10 equivalent to millions a day spanning nearly a decade. The coded records detailed the fates of 23 nuns and 17 orphaned girls, sold into brothels across the Midwest. Letters recovered from Catherine's associates in Chicago, St. Louis, and New Orleans boasted of authentic Sisters of Charity, untouched, prior to arrival, offered at premium rates. Special requests nuns inhabit, rituals reenacted, fetched even higher sums. Pregnant women commanded the greatest prices, reserved for elite patrons. Most damning of all was a leather-bound diary, stitched into Elizabeth's bedding. Inside were chilling accounts, names, dates, and disturbing observations. Some notes were detached, almost businesslike. Sister Agnes delivered to Chicago. September 1855. Valued at $400. Others carried grotesque satisfaction. Sister Teresa resisted fiercely. Callahan relished breaking her. Buried at east edge of Beanfield. November 1856. The diary also revealed the involvement of a disgraced Chicago physician, Dr. William Matthews. Once respected, Matthews had been expelled from practice after scandals of impropriety. According to Elizabeth's writings, he inspected each victim, certifying health and, most horrifically, verifying virginity and assurance that greatly increased market value. Dr. M. confirms, Sister Rebecca suitable for premium placement. Recommend maximum use prior to transfer. One note read, guided by these writings, officers exhumed the convent's gardens. Beneath the beans and herbs they unearthed for skeletal remains, their throats bearing clear signs of strangulation. Among them lay Sister Mary Collins, identified by her St. Bridget medal. Her grave was fresh, the soil scarcely settled. She had perished mere days earlier, perhaps shortly before Father Ryan's arrival and the convent's unmasking. Only Elizabeth, whose true name was Margaret Wilson, ever faced earthly justice. Declared unfit for trial, she spent her last years confined to the Wisconsin State Asylum. She died in 1863, never having spoken coherently again. Records describe her as mute by day, but screaming at night of the master who comes to punish. Per betrayal. Catherine Murphy, her real identity never verified, and Sister Margaret, later identified as Catherine Donovan, slipped into legend. Witnesses claimed they fled to New Orleans, later Havana, where similar schemes preyed on immigrant women. Despite detailed descriptions, Catherine, tall and stern with pale blue eyes and a Boston lilt. Margaret, gaunt, sharp-eyed, with precise speech and knowledge of medicine. Neither was ever captured. Reports surfaced sporadically to women boarding a steamboat or running a finishing school in Havana. Yet, in the endless expanse of 19th-century America, they disappeared as if swallowed by the frontier. By the time investigators finally arrived, the women were already gone. James Callahan of Chicago, later identified as one of the key figures, was arrested 6 months afterward during a brothel raid. He was hanged for killing a police officer in the struggle that followed. Before his execution, he confessed to many elements of the St. Mary's operation, but insisted he knew nothing of where the true leader had gone. They planned it all. He reportedly told the prison chaplain the night before he died. Mother Catherine always said escape routes were ready, false names prepared. They'd done it before, shed their skins like snakes when the time came. When asked about the mysterious master mentioned in Sister Elizabeth's journals, Callahan grew agitated. Don't speak of him, he warned. He's not the kind of man you want to know who you'd want knowing you. Whether this figure was a delusion, a title for an unseen accomplice, or something darker, his identity has never been proven. The Church acted quickly to bury the scandal. Bishop Henny was quietly removed to a secluded monastery in Europe, where official records claim he spent his final years in prayerful reflection. But his private letters reveal a tortured conscience. The blood of those poor women cries out to heaven. Mother Catherine told me the money was for missions. I never asked. May God forgive me. I never asked. The convent itself was torn down, the land sold, and the profits redirected toward building an orphanage in Milwaukee. No official report ever acknowledged the bodies unearthed on the grounds or the crimes committed there. The site was stripped of consecration in a private ritual attended only by Monsignor Kelly and Archbishop Hughes, without public notice. The surviving sisters were scattered to convents across the country, each bound by silence under threat of excommunication. Most lived the rest of their lives in quiet obedience, their trauma unhealed, and their suffering erased from history. One exception was Sister Josephine Brady, rescued but carrying the child of her abuse. She gave birth to a daughter 2 months later. Her pleas to raise the baby were denied. The infant was placed with a Catholic family in Pennsylvania, with orders that the truth remains secret. Records show Sister Josephine died by her own hand in 1861, leaving a heartbreaking note. I cannot forget, I cannot forgive, not them, not the Church, not myself. God have mercy on us all. Another survivor, Sister Rebecca Murphy, broke the silence. Believing religious life, she took the name Rachel Martin and in 1865 anonymously published The Dark Convent. The book laid out the atrocities in detail, closely mirroring the evidence uncovered by investigators. In its closing pages she wrote, "What happened at St. Mary's was not the work of a few wicked women alone. It thrived in a system that prizes silence above truth, reputation above justice. Unless this is faced, there will be other St. Mary's, other victims hidden behind holy walls." The Church moved swiftly to crush the book. Copies were seized and burned. Catholic papers denounced it as slander, and Protestant presses, fearful of lawsuits, ceased printing after the first edition. Rachel Martin herself vanished from public record after 1866, though some evidence suggests she fled west, opening a shelter for abused women in California. Father Thomas Ryan, the priest who first exposed the horror, fared little better. Initially praised, he was soon reassigned to a remote parish in Minnesota, as church leaders sought to smother the scandal. His private journal, discovered after his death in 1886, reveals decades of torment. I see their faces in my dreams. I hear their cries. Did God forgive us for failing them? Did he forgive his church for choosing silence? His final entry, written days before his death, reads, 28 years have passed, and Rome still refuses to answer my letters. The new bishops act as though it never was, but it did happen. They were real women with real souls, and they endured real torment. If the Church will not speak, then I pray someone, someday, will remember their madness. Bernadette, Teresa, and all the rest whose names should not be forgotten. The shadow of St. Mary's spread far beyond Wisconsin. The revelations forced new inspections of convents, orphanages, and schools across the Midwest. Several smaller abuses were uncovered, never on the same scale as St. Mary's, but enough to suggest that Catherine Murphy and her circle had built a model others copied. And so the horror of St. Mary's did not simply end with its walls. It echoed, shaping suspicion, reform, and fear for generations to come. In Chicago, police actions in late 1858 targeted 3 so-called houses of charity. But what they uncovered shocked the city. 9 women who had once been nuns, along with 13 others forced into prostitution, were pulled from captivity. Their testimonies revealed a system strikingly similar to what had been uncovered earlier at St. Mary's. Religious institutions used as a facade for organized sexual exploitation, with wealthy patrons paying dearly for access to women they believed carried an aura of purity. One woman, listed in police records only by the initials M, tied her ordeal directly back to St. Mary's. "I was sent from Wisconsin in 1856, she testified. Mother Catherine herself delivered me into Madame Rousseau's hands in Chicago. She warned me that should I ever try to flee, both the law and the church would brand me a fallen woman. For almost 2 years, I believed her." Ledgers seized in the raids implicated prominent men, judges, bankers, even members of the state legislature, as both clients and financial backers of the scheme. Yet, when trials approached, the cases disintegrated. Witnesses retracted statements or disappeared. Crucial evidence was inexplicably lost, and judges issued baffling procedural rulings that effectively ended prosecution. The Chicago Tribune, in November 1858, remarked bitterly, "Justice in our city appears reserved for those without influential friends. The men whose names fill the brothel books walk freely, while the women they exploited are left disgraced and voiceless." The pattern of suppression extended beyond Illinois. In St. Louis, whispers of similar operations drew Monsignor Kelly, the same cleric who had first inspected St. Mary's, to investigate in 1859. Within days of his arrival, unknown assailants left him brutally beaten and warned him to leave. Though he survived, Archbishop Hughes ordered him back to New York, halting the inquiry. Kelly's private letters, later uncovered in diocesan archives in 1950, reveal his despair. "What we have seen is but the exposed edge of a vast corruption. Bit tendrils reach into the loftiest circles of society, and perhaps into the church itself. I fear powerful hands have decided the matter must end here." For the women rescued, the aftermath was devastating. The 12 surviving nuns from St. Mary's carried wounds the church had little capacity to treat. Even those not physically assaulted bore scars of terror, loss, and coerced complicity. Sister Claire O'Donnell, forced to help restrain Sister Teresa during her execution, showed signs we would now recognize as severe post-traumatic stress. Sent to Philadelphia, she was punished for her night terrors and her refusal to keep silent about what she had endured. Eventually, she abandoned religious life, was briefly institutionalized, and vanished from the record altogether. The 5 sisters liberated from the locked cell: Rebecca Murphy, Josephine Brady, Claire O'Donnell, Maria Fitzpatrick, and Anne Sullivan, had endured the harshest cruelty. Their later fates show how ill-prepared 19th-century institutions were to respond to deep trauma. Sister Josephine's desperate suicide after losing her child has already been noted. Sister Maria Fitzpatrick remained cloistered in a contemplative order, but was described as prone to hysterical breakdowns until her death in 1870, attributed to nervous exhaustion. Sister Anne Sullivan, however, chose another path. Though bound by vows and the Church's insistence on silence, she quietly created networks of support for other women religious who had suffered abuse. Letters discovered in her Boston convent after her death in 1899 reveal her resolve. We must separate God's truth from the failings of men. What befell us was not divine will, but human wickedness clothed in sacred garb. Our duty now is to ensure those garments cannot be stolen again. The most disturbing mysteries of St. Mary's lie in the numbers. The official inquiry acknowledged, put 40 women trafficked or killed, 23 nuns, and 17 orphan girls. But Sister Elizabeth's hidden notebook suggested more. Her entries mention rural acquisitions, young women taken from isolated farms or small settlements whose disappearances went unrecorded. Local newspapers of the era note vanished servants, farm daughters said to have married and moved west, or widows rumored to have gone seeking new opportunities. How many were instead absorbed into the trafficking network is unknown. An entry from October 1857 is chilling. Rural acquisitions this year, 14, mostly Scandinavian stock. Special commission to New Orleans completed. And then there were the missing nuns. Of the 23 who disappeared from St. Mary's between 1854 and 1858, only 9 were ever found. 4 buried on the convent grounds, 5 freed in later raids. The other 14 simply vanished. Surviving records hint they may have been sold into distant networks, some as far as New Orleans. Their true fates remain lost to history. San Francisco, and even places across the ocean, were whispered as destinations where the missing women might have been sent. Despite repeated efforts by individual church investigators, their final fates were never conclusively established. A fragment of the truth surfaced in 1872 when a missionary in San Francisco reported finding a woman in a waterfront brothel who claimed she had once been Sister Catherine Walsh of St. Mary's Convent in Wisconsin. By the time church officials followed up, the woman had already died of typhoid fever and was buried in an unmarked grave reserved for the destitute. Whether she truly was one of the vanished nuns remains uncertain, but her detailed account matched the known facts of the St. Mary's case with striking precision. The greatest mystery endures around Mother Catherine Murphy and Sister Margaret Clark, the 2 women believed to have engineered the entire deception. Records suggest that Margaret's true name was Catherine Donovan, a young woman expelled from a convent in Ireland for vague moral transgressions. She appears to have arrived in America during the 1840s, where she likely met Murphy. Together they conceived a scheme to exploit the rapid growth of Catholic institutions on the frontier as a convenient disguise for their criminal enterprise. After St. Mary's collapsed, the pair disappeared. What followed was one of the largest, yet most discreet manhunts of the pre-Civil War years, carried out quietly so as not to ignite scandal. Reports placed them in New Orleans, Havana, and Mexico City, each time linked with religious or charitable establishments that catered to wealthy patrons. The last credible trace came in 1863 from a former Chicago detective hired by the New York diocese. He reported seeing the two women in Veracruz, Mexico, where they ran a finishing school for young women, institution he described as bearing every resemblance to their earlier operation. His written account, preserved in diocesan archives, ended with a chilling warning. I believe Murphy and Clark have rebuilt their enterprise with the protection of wealthy Mexican patrons. I was warned in no uncertain terms to cease my inquiries. 2 officials who had agreed to help me were found dead on the morning we planned to enter the school. I can only conclude these women enjoy protection at the highest levels of authority. The legacy of St. Mary's extended well beyond the immediate tragedy. In the 1850s and 1860s, Protestant publications seized on the story, often exaggerating its details as evidence of corruption within the Catholic Church. This fueled widespread anti-Catholic sentiment, which in turn led Catholic communities to become more defensive and secretive, ironically, reinforcing the very conditions that had enabled the abuse in the first place. More importantly, the case established a pattern of institutional response that would echo for generations. Accountability narrowed to direct perpetrators, shielding of higher authorities, removal or silencing of victims, and finally, a return to outward normalcy with little structural change. In private correspondence later unsealed in 1975, Archbishop Hughes admitted to Vatican officials that systemic flaws had been exposed. We have removed the immediate cause of scandal and arranged care for the victims. Yet I must warn that our oversight is fundamentally broken. I recommend a full review of how we appoint and supervise those in authority. His words, however foresighted, appear to have been quietly ignored. The preference for secrecy and internal handling of abuse cases remained the Church's default stance well into the modern era. All physical traces of St. Mary's Convent have since been erased. The buildings were demolished, the land sold and resold until it became a suburban neighborhood whose residents are unaware of what once stood beneath their feet. The archives were stripped of the most incriminating records, many sealed or destroyed. Even the graves of murdered nuns were left unmarked, their remains eventually paved over without ceremony or remembrance. Yet fragments of the story endure in scattered documents, faded journals, old newspapers, and oral traditions kept alive within Wisconsin Catholic families. Pieced together, they reveal not only the horrors at St. Mary's, but also the broader systemic failures that allowed them to happen, the perils of unchecked authority, the vulnerability of isolated communities, and the human capacity for both unspeakable cruelty and extraordinary resilience. Father Thomas Ryan, whose determination first exposed the crimes, left a final plea in his journal. Remember them. Remember that they lived, that they suffered, and that their suffering mattered. To revisit their story, however incomplete, is to honor that request and to recognize something timeless about power, vulnerability, and the vigilance needed to guard the innocent from exploitation, cloaked in sacred trust. The Wisconsin Historical Society holds a modest but invaluable collection of related materials, accessible only to accredited researchers. Among them is a water-damaged letter, believed to have been written in 1880 by Sister Anne Sullivan to the grown daughter of Sister Josephine. Breda the child, conceived in captivity and adopted out at birth. The letter was never delivered, as Sister Anne could not locate her. Its closing words, however, offer a fitting epitaph for the dark history of St. Mary's. Should you ever discover your origins, know this: your mother was not disgraced, but courageous. The evil at St. Mary's was not of God or of true faith, but of human cruelty draped in holy garments. The real convent was not the stone building where such horrors occurred, but the sisterhood that sustained one another in the darkness, who whispered prayers, who remembered each other's names when all else was stripped away, who still believe in salvation when God seemed absent. That is the legacy I wish to leave you. Not merely a tale of suffering, but of endurance. This story reminds us that the most dreadful evils often disguise themselves beneath holy veneers, and that silence within institutions can prolong wounds long after the crimes themselves. What do you think? Was everything uncovered, or do secrets still lie beneath Wisconsin soil? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe, ring the notification bell, and share with someone who loves chilling histories. See you in the next chapter. The saga of St. Mary's Convent became a turning point in American religious history, though one quickly buried in deliberate silence. The official investigation, once the first reports surfaced, uncovered corruption reaching far beyond Wisconsin. Clergy, wealthy patrons, and even political figures were implicated across the Midwest. Yet the Church insisted the horrors were the acts of three impostors who had infiltrated the convent. Leaked internal records, however, told another story. Bishop Henny had received no fewer than 7 warnings between 1855 and 1858 about missing women and strange financial dealings at St. Mary's. Each letter was followed by a generous donation from Mother Catherine to the bishop's cathedral fund, after which the complaints quietly disappeared. Among the most damning papers was a 1856 exchange. A young priest reported that a farmer had discovered a nun's habit, soaked in blood, abandoned in the woods. The bishop's reply was chilling. He instructed the garment be returned to Mother Catherine with our compliments, and reassured the farmer it was likely stage paint used in convent pageants. 3 days later, a $500 gift arrived for the cathedral fund. Decades later, in 1932, local historian Margaret Holloway recorded her grandmother's recollections as a servant on a nearby estate. People always knew something was wrong at St. Mary's, she said. On quiet nights, screams drifted from the north wing. They told us it was prayer or penance. We didn't question it. Catholic rituals seemed strange to Protestant neighbors. But the children, they feared the sad women in black who stared from the convent windows with empty eyes. In 1890, long after the convent had closed, an elderly woman arrived at the Pinkerton Detective Agency in Chicago. She gave her name as Mary Callahan, sister of James Callahan, who had been executed years earlier. She carried a worn leather portfolio, hidden by her brother before his capture. Letters between Mother Catherine and her clients, ledgers, payments, and, most disturbing, a list of priests and politicians who had either patronized or shielded the operation. My brother was no innocent, Mary admitted. He confessed the terrible things he'd done before they hanged him. But he said he was only a servant. The true masters were far worse. He told me where these papers were hidden, and said I must keep them safe until the architects of this evil were gone to their graves. Now they are dead, and the truth can be told. The Pinkerton agent, himself a devout Catholic, was shaken. Instead of giving the portfolio to his employers, he delivered it directly to Cardinal James Gibbons in Baltimore. The Cardinal responded to Mary with a polite letter. I have read your materials. Though I share your horror, public disclosure would only harm the faith of countless innocents. The guilty have met divine justice. The victims are in God's mercy. Perhaps the greatest good is to let this darkness remain hidden while ensuring it is never repeated. After that, Mary's attempts to publicize the truth were constantly thwarted. Newspapers refused to print her story. A pamphlet she tried to publish was abandoned after men in clerical garb visited the printer. Her home was broken into twice, though nothing was taken. At last, in 1892, she passed copies of the key documents to her nephew with instructions to keep them safe for future generations. But in 1908, a fire consumed records in the Baltimore Archdiocese, including, reportedly, the Callahan portfolio. Officials claimed it was an accident, but former employees later swore it had been suspiciously confined to one set of shelves, the section containing St. Mary's files. I was told to store those documents together against all rules, confessed archivist Thomas Moran on his deathbed in 1947. When the fire came, it burned only those. You can draw your own conclusions. The final trace of St. Mary's surfaced in 1912. Renovation workers in Veracruz, Mexico, discovered a pre-sealed room inside an abandoned mansion. Inside sat the mummified remains of two elderly women, seated across from one another as if frozen mid-conversation. Before them lay a tea, serviced the cups laced with a potent local poison. Among their belongings were forged identities, Catholic, prelates, bundles of American and Mexican currency, and a small golden locket painted with the image of St. Mary's Convent as it appeared in the 1850s. Whether the end of their lives came by their own hands or through another's violence was never settled. Mexican authorities, uncertain of what exactly they had uncovered, eventually passed fragments of their findings to American newspapers. Elderly survivors of St. Mary's recognized objects discovered with the bodies as once belonging to Mother Catherine Murphy and Sister Margaret Clark. Evidence suggested the two women had died around 1880, having lived in hidden affluence, but never escaping the chains of their past. The most unsettling discovery was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with coded entries echoing the same language once used in St. Mary's records, references to acquisitions, placements, and special clients. Its final note, written the very day of their deaths, read chillingly, "He comes tonight. We have failed him for the last time." Whether he was a patron, a former accomplice, or something more sinister has never been determined. Some researchers connect it to secretive religious movements that circulated among wealthy elites in the late 19th century, while others suspect it referred to powerful backers of their trafficking network. Excavations beneath the Veracruz estate revealed horrors of their own. The remains of at least a dozen young women buried over 2 decades. Papers found on the property indicated they had been recruited from poor families with promises of schooling or employment, only to suffer fates no different from those at St. Mary's. The evil that began in Wisconsin did not perish there, wrote the New York Times. It simply migrated south, like a disease seeking fresh flesh. The Catholic Church's reaction was subdued. A short announcement confirmed that 2 deceased women had once belonged to a dissolved Wisconsin convent, but stressed they had been excommunicated and were acting independently. No acknowledgment was given to the crimes or to their victims. Today, in Milwaukee stands a modest memorial garden, erected in 2010 by an anonymous benefactor in honor of the forgotten women. The church has never recognized it officially. No names are inscribed, yet every spring fresh flowers appear mysteriously at the site, believed by some to be left by descendants of Sister Mary Collins, the nun whose smuggled note first exposed the convent's hidden terrors. Even in recent years, attempts to investigate have met with obstruction. Scholars report archives suddenly withholding permission, documents vanishing days before scheduled research, and even intimidation, threatening calls, break-ins where only notes were disturbed, and unexplained surveillance. Historian Rebecca Lawson concluded in her 2003 essay Buried Secrets, "Someone still prefers this story remain unfinished, whether to shield the legacy of prominent families or to protect institutional authority. Forces remain intent on silencing the past. The grounds where St. Mary's once stood have long since been reclaimed by the countryside. New homes and new parishes rose where limestone walls once loomed. Yet on mist-heavy autumn nights, some locals swear they hear distant sounds drifting on the wind, women praying softly, or muffled cries begging for release. Trick of the air, or something else that is left to each listener to decide. In 2018, During excavation for a housing development on the site, workers unearthed a small metal box. Inside lay a rosary, a folded veil, and a handwritten list of 23 names. Beneath the inscription, "Remember us." The box was placed in diocesan custody, where it remains locked away, unstudied and unseen. The descendants of Jimmy Fletcher, the farm boy who once risked everything to carry Sister Mary's desperate plea to Father Ryanhev, kept their own vigil. In their farmhouse kitchen sits a simple shelf holding a silver cross, said to be the one given to Jimmy in gratitude. Next to it, a carefully copied list of the nuns' names, updated whenever new details emerge. Great-grandpa Jimmy told us those women should never be forgotten. Family patriarch Robert Fletcher told a local paper in 2020. He said, "Truth may be buried, but that doesn't make it any less true. They lived, they suffered, they mattered. What cannot be denied is that between 1854 and 1862, within what was supposed to be sacred ground, unimaginable evil was carried out. That it happened and that it was then so quickly erased remains the deepest horror of St. Mary's. The tragedy is not only the crimes themselves, but how easily memory of them was buried. So remember Sister Agnes, Sister Bernadette, Sister Teresa, and the rest. Remember that they lived, that they endured, and that their pain was real.